Tally has built one of India's most enduring business brands, largely through trust and product utility rather than aggressive visibility led marketing. In today's environment, how do you drive growth without diluting that credibility?
When you look at Tally and the 40 years of the trust and credibility it's built, it's not been by means of making noise or being omnipresent or too much media. It has always relied in the promise that it made to the customers. Right. One thing we really pride ourselves on, and is the fact that we understand our customers and the customers understand us. Right. That has been really the foundation on which the Tally brand itself is built. So for ensuring how that credibility got built, the focus had been on spending a lot of time with customers, really showcasing the power of the product, which in effect was built basis the input and the feedback that they gave. Right? I mean, there's a thing, a very famous saying by our founder, Mr. Shamsundar Goenka, when he said that, when I'm driving a car, I want to be the driver and not the mechanic. And the same thing holds for the product Tally also, that when I'm operating the product, I want to operate it as a business owner and not a technician or a engineer, right? So somebody who's coded it. So the whole idea behind Tally coming into being was that it understands how the business runs, and it is very easy for an owner to operate it without even understanding technology. Right, so that is precisely the promise on which our whole marketing endeavor is focused on. So if there is a campaign, and what I typically ask is, when there is a campaign that's running, is it withholding and upholding rather that promise that we made to the customer, that we are here to understand them, we are here to support them and make sure that the business runs on their own, without the help of any external agencies. Right, so if that promise is getting delivered through the messaging that we're driving, then I think the job is done. And that is how we've continued, focusing on building credibility by being in touch with the customer and experiential marketing.
In businesses like Tally, customer acquisition is often influenced as much by accountants, partners, and word of mouth as by direct campaigns. How do you meaningfully measure marketing's contribution to business growth?
This again, I think is an area, especially when it comes to word of mouth and influencer marketing. I think the metrics behind just the clicks or the followers, etc., they don't hold too much water in B2B, right? And that's the reason why for us, given that the accountant or the CAs, the tax practitioners, they become evangelists and they become the power behind the word of mouth. The measure has to start much earlier, right? And when I say the measure has to start much earlier, is that I would simply look at, are more accountants or CAs recommending Tally versus the previous year? And why would that happen? That typically would happen if our line of communication and if our messaging and connect with this community and the content that we share with them continues to be relevant and continues to be important. Right, so for me, the important thing will always be to see that how we're enabling our own field on our own team on field, our salespeople, to ensure that their sales cycle reduces because the content is already exposed to the influencing community, and that is what kind of drives this messaging across. Right, so that is typically the measures that we look at beyond just the traditional things of followers and clicks and things like that.
For many small businesses, Tally is deeply embedded into their day to day operations. How does marketing reinforce reliability in a category where even small disruptions can directly affect business continuity?
I think if you look at the audience that we're catering to, the most important aspect there, and which sometimes gets sort of broken, is being present at all touch points and being a reliable presence at all touch points, right? That is important. So all the disruptions that you talk about, given today's day and age, right? There's too much cacophony. You're hearing things from all ends, and you don't know what to really rely on. So I think it's very important to build that credible voice for your audience and build it over a period of time to ensure that the information that you're giving out is true, it's honest. I think in this entire piece, authenticity is what people would really look for, right? And when you look at the kind of businesses that we cater to, it's not so much about, because the nature of their work really is all about a lot of chaos, right? I mean, they're operating in a lot of chaos. They have their business pressures, they have their management pressures, and whatnot. And in between all of that, if there are these external disruptions or external compliance triggers that happen, they need a reliable partner and reliable source of information. So, one thing that we've always relied on is to make sure that our presence and consistency of messaging across all platforms and across all touch points for the customer remains. And that is something that we take very, very seriously. Right? So I think it's ultimately about being authentic, it is about being credible source of information, and it is about being in touch at every touch point where your audience could potentially look for you.
Businesses today expect personalized experiences, but they are also increasingly cautious about sharing financial and operational data. How do you build relevance without making customers feel over surveilled?
Just the nature of our business is that it deals with financial information, right? And that's like sacrosanct. So one thing which Tally has always stood by and stood for is the privacy of data of its customers. Even now, we don't have access to all the telemetry data. There is a concept of vault in Tally, right? That the information when it goes there, it can only be accessed by the user, by the business owner. Even Tally cannot access it, right? So that is the level of safety and security that has been built. Having said that, now when you're doing any kind of personalization basis, the data that you have or the behavior that you may have seen of the customers, I think there is a very thin line between personalization, which becomes creepy, and personalization, which is useful, right? Now, as a user, also, when I'm getting information which is helpful because of certain data that you may have looked at, or I as a company may have looked at, that is something that we try to focus on. But where it becomes prying, where I start getting the sense, or the customer starts getting the sense that their data is being overanalyzed or they're being watched, I think that is something that we absolutely steer clear of. Right? So I think in this whole piece, the personalization, ensuring that you respect that thin line between prying and being helpful is what is critical, and that exactly is what we follow. So even for our emailing marketing, it's not about just bombarding the audience with nudges and in the name of lead nurture and things like that, but it really is about maintaining a very simple cadence where they don't feel overburdened by information, or just feel that okay, it's time for me to unsubscribe.
AI led tools are increasingly shaping targeting, engagement, and customer intelligence. Where do you think human judgment still plays the most critical role?
I think it's a matter of using it judiciously, using it to create perhaps frameworks, using it to think about planning or bringing more structure to the thought process. But where the human judgment really comes in is that AI will not know my end customer who's operating out of a of Pina in Bangalore, or some place in Coimbatore or in Jalandhar, right? The connect with that customer, the insights of that specific audience is something that only me as a human or the organization can really build, right? And that is, I think, the real essence, because for, again, brands like Tally, the company, and the product like Tally, we work very, very focused and very sharply on the customer and the consumer insight, right? The complete workflows of a business entrepreneur. All of those things are not something that AI can get on its own. So I think that intervention and that human intervention of talking to the customer, of coming up with the critical insights, etc., is something where you will still need the human judgment coming in. But using that human judgment to build it into something which is relevant in terms of getting the output, that is where AI can play a role. The second aspect would also be that understanding and analyzing the tone of voice for your brand communicating to your set of audience. Right? That is not again something which I feel that AI is yet able to assess and come out with. Right? So that is an intervention of the bringing out the tone of voice, which is linked to your brand purpose, which is linked to your customer insight and requirements. I think that is another area where making sure that the human interface is very, very critical. And the third aspect is also that whatever output you end up getting from the AI, you would still need to vet it. You will still need to vet that the information is accurate, it agrees and complies and is in line with what your brand stands for and what you really intend communicating to your audience. So I think at that level, or making sure that the information being shared is authentic from your brand's tone of voice, that is another area of validation where human judgment will come into play.
India's digitization story is accelerating, but many businesses are still transitioning from informal or semi digital systems. What role do you think marketing plays in building confidence towards technology adoption?
See, one thing, especially when I talk about our own business, when you look at the audience, a lot of them don't adopt technology not because they're scared of it or they don't want to, but I think that the issue has always been of broken workflows, broken communication, scattered information, and things like that, right? So I think as marketing, and especially for a product category and brand like Tally, I think what becomes important for us is to give a very seamless end-to-end messaging about what is on offer, right? How are you giving a sort of a lending hand to the customer. And that is where you're not just talking about, not just creating the need, but it also is sharing stories about how digitization or technology has helped people like our audience, other people. And that's where I think the role of customer stories, the testimonials end up becoming very, very important. Because as audience, you always need, some form of empathy. So if there is a brand that empathizes with you or it brings to you the true, real stories of other people like you, that tends to create a connect. That tends to give you more confidence in how you might want to adopt technology. So it really is not about making them fearful of the traditional methods of work that they were following, but it is really about easing them into the digitized or the automated workflows going forward. And I think that is the role that marketing can play in easing them into the use, rather than starting out with technology or the technology stories. The importance is to bring the human fears and solutions into play by taking the route of empathy.
As technology becomes easier to build and distribute, what do you think will separate brands that remain deeply trusted by businesses from those that become interchangeable over time?
It's very interesting you're asking me this question because I represent a company which has been around and been a market leader for the last 40 years. And this is, we keep having this discussion internally also, that there's so many products that came and went, and the competition just keeps growing, and it's great, right? Because it's just increasing the overall pie, and you just have to maintain or grow your share in that pie. So when you look at what has been at least our strength in making sure that we've like tested waters, and we've overcome all kinds of different waves, compliance waves or external waves or competitive waves that have come in. I think again, rest in the fact that we are a customer centric organization. So it's very, very important for the customer to know and believe in what you say and what you do, right? So, simple example being, right, that when the whole cloud wave was going on, right, at that time we took a call that we won't get into it till we know that it's 100% secure, because the trust that the customers have in us for securing that financial data is paramount. So if that is the trust that the customer has in me, in Tally, then that becomes the most important thing for me to uphold, right? And that is a decision. So it's not a failure that we didn't ride the wave of cloud at that point in time, but it was a conscious decision that we made, that the trust of the customer is what is paramount for us, right? So if that credibility, that customer centric behavior continues, that is what sustains you for a very long time. So if you look at a lot of other brands or companies which come and go, I think one of the facts is that there's so many trends, right, and there's so many fads that keep coming and going. The important one is that if you look at some of these companies and brands, it's all been about just following everything and trying to do everything. I think being conscious of making the right choices and the choices that align with your values, and when I say yours, it is about the company's values, and it is about the values that the customers or your audience resonate with and they appreciate or respect you for. I think that becomes the important one to work with and follow. Right, so these are the two fundamental things that we have always kept in mind: being true to our customers in terms of understanding or hearing them. And the second thing is being true to the values that are important to us and what we resonate and our audience resonates with us on. And I think that credibility, that trust, and that respect is what sustains over